Very happy to be joined today by one of the English language voices of AAA Lucha Libre on Fight, all around pro wrestling utility player, Larry Dallas. Larry, welcome to Under the Ring Pro Wrestling Conversations. Thanks for being with me today.
No problem, Phil. I've known you for a long time. It's an absolute, for me, it's a privilege to be talking to you. There are very few people I like talking to in life when I'm not working, but you're one guy I'd make an exception for.
I'm happy to be on that list. So you're someone fans might know in the past from Evolve or the Independent Circuit or Busted Open or Dragon Gate. How exactly did you end up as the English voice of AAA Lucha Libre, and what's that experience been like?
AAA. I ended up with AAA basically through, I went over to I did start working for Dragon Gate in Japan in 2019. I went over for Kobe World, July of 19. It was me and Rich Bocchini of MLW that went over. And that got pretty good reviews. And those reviews was the first time that I had heard from AAA that Conan was interested. He liked your work and he wants to talk to you. And then obviously throughout 2020, the fall of 19 into 2020, I was supposed to be with Dragon Gate through the entire 2020 calendar year. I had a whole slate set up for them, different lengths of tours from like 2 weeks to 6 weeks, depending upon the show schedule and stuff like that, and the pandemic happened. So my goal for 2020 was I was going to do Dragon Gate, and then I would do the big AAA shows. And that kind of all went by the wayside. And then it literally took, through the pandemic, it took a lot of back and forth with Conan and myself, and just, kind of waiting my turn. There was a lot of hoops they had to jump through to get me in. A couple of people that had to, get their first crack at the job and not, I guess, do it up to the level they wanted to. And that's how it kind of happened. It was quick when it happened, but it took a very long time if you go from the initial starting point of where we spoke. But the experience of working for them is fantastic, especially being down there. AAA is about as professional of an organization as I've ever worked for. I'd say, probably goes Dragon Gate and AAA are right neck and neck as far as the way they handle talent and the way they take care of you. It's night and day compared to like an independent wrestler lifestyle.
What's it like to be at Triple Mania in Monterey or Tijuana, and what is kind of the vibe of AAA? And you've been in a lot of different experiences in wrestling.
Yeah, the vibe is the vibe. They're very relaxed. I don't know if it's just their mentality, or I don't really speak a lot of Spanish. So when I'm in that locker room with them, I'll hang out with like Hugo or Carlos Cabrera. Like I'll hang out with the commentators and kind of keep to myself. Or there's a couple of people I'm friendly with. But for the most part, I kind of kept with my ilk. You got to watch everybody. Everyone's kind of very calm. For me, to be in a stadium that big with you're talking 15, 16,000 fans is, an experience I've never had. It's an experience that very few people have in life. Like that you're going to be able to go out there and do that. I mean, they had the jets flying over the stadium. They had the Mexican National Guard out there doing the doing the national anthem with the big flag out in the outfield or the midfield of the soccer pitch, because Tijuana was a soccer stadium. Just that many people being in there, being in a sports booth, like where you'd see like Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, being in like one of those actual booths, calling it from the top of a stadium, looking down, the whole experience. You're talking about someone that's like, I'm not a professionally trained broadcaster, so I don't know if I ever had those dreams of being in those booths and doing those things and having those experiences. So it's just very, very surreal and very humbling. And I try to appreciate the moments.
For fans who haven't tried a Lucha Libre show, I am not the biggest Lucha Libre fan in the world, but I kind of check in and out of it when I want to.
Yeah.
How would you sell them on a AAA pay-per-view, and what makes AAA unique?
It's an event. I'll be honest with you. It's an event. There's so much going on. Listen, I'm not going to tell you top to bottom. It's forbidden door. But you got great matches. I mean, there's guys. If you talk about Laredo Kid and Phoenix and Pentagon and Bandito and Taurus. These guys are as good as anybody at pro wrestling. They go out there and do what they do. The women are featured. The women are very athletic and talented in their own ways. There's angles. There's exoticos. There's a little bit of everything there for you. I think as a fan, you go in there, you're going to have great matches. Like what surprised me the most the past two shows was you had Villano Cuatro, Villano 4, which some of you guys might remember from Nitro. like the WCW Luchador era. I believe he was when I got his back broken actually on the trapdoor with the Ultimate Warrior, or his neck broken. He's like 60 something years old, and they're doing a thing called like Ruleta de Muerte. It was an 8-person tournament with a loser's advance, and it's going to culminate now at the final Triple Mania October 15th in Mexico City, with Pentagon and Viano 4 being the unfortunate guys in the finals. But Viano 4 went out there in 2 shows and had great matches at 60-something years old. It was completely different style matchups. It would be, I don't want to say it's like Memphis style matches that he had, but it was brawling and blood and a lot of mask, pulling. And I wasn't expecting that coming in. I was like, okay, you got some older guys wrestling on this. I'm sure it's going to be great for nostalgia, great for the crowd. But as a commentator, maybe I won't be as juiced up or as into it. And, it was fantastic. So I think the beautiful part about AAA is that there's, they have a little bit of everything going on for people. And, you get to, there's different styles, there's different matchups. You're going to have some flying matchups. You're going to have some brawling. You're going to have some just pure gimmickry. And I think you get a little bit of taste of everything. And it's like buffet style pro wrestling.
And then I'm not sure if everybody in America is always aware. I think they are somewhat, but you never really know of, like, specifically for that mask tournament, just how much those masks mean.
Oh yeah,
in that culture. I mean, Viano 4 is a guy who's been around for. I was just going to say, Viano 4 is somebody who's been around 30, 35 years, whatever it's been, and that mask has always been a big part of his and his family's history.
Yeah, that's a legendary Mendoza family. His father was a wrestler. Obviously, there's 5 brothers that all had masks. There was Viano 3 Jr. or Hijo del Viano 3 Jr. So like there's a lot of different legacies with those masks. I mean, we just had Chic Tormenta lost her mask at Tijuana. They did a Ruleta de Muerte. It was a cage match where there were 7 luchadoras in the matchup. All of them had masks, and the final 2 people were going to face later on that night in a Mascara con Mascara matchup. And basically it went the way it went, and Chic Tormenta lost it. There was tears in her eyes. She was very emotional, and these masks mean a lot to these people, especially when you get to guys like Viano 4, who's had a mask for a very long time. It's a part of his legacy. You get the Pentagon, who has his whole career ahead of him, and what would losing his mask do to his marketability, due to his box office, due to the money he's going to be making in his career. So there's a lot of those different layers on those things. The masks are very important. You know it as a fan if you read about it and you hear about it, but it's another thing to be down there and see it. It changes things. Like, I was at the airport the day before. So that Friday night, there was a delay at the airport in Mexico City heading to Tijuana. So I'm at the airport bar, and there's, I was with Torus, and I was with Viano 4 was there, and I was with Carlos Cabrera. And I was about to say something to Viano, and then I was like, wait a minute. I was like, what? I was like, I can't call him Viano, right? Because he doesn't have his mask on. Like, what should I call him? And I stopped myself and asked, because it's that important to protect identities down there that you do something like that, where in America you wouldn't even think about it, right? Like if I saw Jigsaw out in a crowd, Chikara wrestler who should be signed somewhere, by the way, and I'd be like, oh, Jigsaw, what's up, buddy? And like I wouldn't even think about who I said it in front of or who I said it around. But down there, you have to be cognizant of those things.
And then too, it's almost like a full character change in some cases when the mask comes off. I remember a few years ago when Dr. Wagner Jr. lost his
Psycho. Psycho
right,
Clown.
And that just like he actually sort of ended up with an odd career resurgence out of the complete change of Dr. Wagner Jr. off of what people knew.
Yeah, so absolutely. It's a funny dichotomy there, how it works out. It launched Conan's career when he lost his mask, and he lost his mask very early. I think it was like, might have been the first Triple Mania he lost it against Sin Caras in a Mascara con, Caballero match, I believe, like the hair versus mask match. And it launched his career. And there's guys like Rey Mysterio who lost their mask, put it back on, wasn't that big of a deal. You see it all the time, but sometimes losing a mask changes your career badly.
Yep. How much did you know about Lucha Libre, and how much did you have to learn about Lucha Libre before taking the mic in AAA?
I always saw, like, I'm a guy that reads the Observer every week, right? So, like, I almost read it cover to cover. So, like, I'll read what's going on in NOAH. I'll read what's going on in CMLL. I'll read what's going on in AAA. Even if I don't work for these companies, just to kind of get an idea of who's around and whose names are out there and who do I not know. I don't watch as much as I used to when I was in my teens and 20s, where I just watch whatever I can get my hands on, trading tapes online. But I know enough, and the benefit of working for Dragon Gate is Dragon Gate's very like lucharisu, which is what we'd call like a lucha libre puro, Japanese like hybrid style, because that's the way those guys were classically trained. Obviously, they came from Toriman gym down in Mexico, which is Ultimo Dragon's gym. Ultimo trained those guys to be lucha style and Japanese style, and that's kind of what the Dragon Gate identity was. So stylistically, moving over to AAA was pretty easy for me because I understood the language in that ring. But as far as knowing storylines and factions and all that stuff, that took a lot of work. And I Lucha Blog on Twitter and Rob Viper on Twitter.
Yep.
Those are guys I leaned on when I first started. I was like, hey man, who's at what faction? Because it was so hard to keep track of, and it was so hard to figure out who was with who. Early on, you can do as much studying as you want to, but I mean, you have to have, the masks in front of you, and you have to have when you're doing these matches first. Dinamitas are a second generation group. I believe they're the sons of the sons or nephews of Sin Caras. If you look them up, Nuevo Generation Dinamitas, they literally have like the same mask on.
Oh, wow.
The only way to tell these guys apart is by what they have on their pants. Like one has a lion, one has something. And like, that is literally the only way you could tell which one's which with these guys until you get to learn body types and stuff like that.
Right.
So when you first call their match, you're screwed because you literally cannot keep track of it in a lucha style where guys are going in and out, in and out. So that's why I'm happy Dombrowski has to do all that stuff. And I just going to be the funny color guy. But, learning that's hard with the masks. It is. And, we've had a lot of surprises where surprise guys come out during matches and stuff like that we don't always know about. They don't tell us all the time. And it's like you have to hear the music. It's like, whose music is that? Like, who's that with that person? And you gotta be knowledgeable of a lot of different things because especially down there in AAA, man, stuff is happening so quick, so often. It's hard to keep track of.
How fun is it to count the Professor Mike Tenay as a colleague now, and what kind of stuff wrestling wise were you able to learn from him?
Tenay's great. The first time I ever heard from Mike was after Kobe World 2019, where he was talking to Meltzer about it or whatever, and Tenay was like, that kid that was fantastic what he did. I emailed him. I just went back and forth. When I got the AAA gig, the first person I emailed was Mike Tenay. I said, hey, man, I said, as far as I'm concerned, when I think Lucha Libre in America, Lucha Libre English, I think Mike Tenay. Yep. So the first thing I went was like, what do I need to know? Like, what's your suggestions? Like, how can I do this? Like, literally, like before the Tijuana show, like a couple hours beforehand, I got an email from him saying, hey, good luck tonight. I'm sure you'll be great. Just having that person, like, we don't talk every day. We don't talk every week. I'll check in on him for big shows. And I'll be like, hey, man, what do you think of this? Or how'd you like this show? How'd you do that? Because I just want that feedback from someone that did it. And I just try to, give homage to him. I mean, obviously him and Chris Cruz were the first ones to do English commentary for a Lucha Libre show all the way back in 1993. And Tenay, to me, and our generation is American Lucha Libre. He's the professor for that reason. And to be able to lean on him or ask him questions, I think is an invaluable asset.
I always enjoyed, obviously, he and Chris Cruz did the When Worlds Collide pay-per-view back then for the co-promoted with WCW, but I always cracked up. There was one night on a Nitro where they zoomed in on a fan in a Lucha Libre mask in the crowd, and Tenay and Zbyszko were on commentary, and Tenay just turns to Zbyszko and says, well, actually, that's the mask of the Mexican luchador Fishman.
Yeah.
And Zbyszko had absolutely no idea what was going on. He was like, how do you know that? But it's Tenay. That's the kind of stuff you're going to get from Tenay.
Roy Lucier on Twitter, he's a guy that posts a lot of clips of things, a lot of lucha stuff. He's I think he has Mike Tenay's tape collection, actually.
Wow.
I think Tenay sent him like a bunch of VHSs for Lucier to like convert to media file or whatever, do whatever you want with. So he constantly posts things like, so there's things I see now every day. Like, I listen, you're in it, so you pay attention more, but like, I didn't know Kamala was down there feuding with, Norman Smiley. Like, I didn't know a lot of this stuff back in the 90s. So now I'm watching these clips and these things. And I'm like, I want to go back and watch all this older stuff now to see what was going on and get to know more of the history of things. And, you got guys. And thankfully, like, as negative as social media is at times, and listen, I hate social media too much. If I didn't have to be on it, for promoting purposes, I would just have a burner account and like follow the Mets and the Knicks, just follow the sports teams and see what I wanted to see with the teams I follow. But there's a lot of positive out there. Because there's people that know more than you.
Yep.
Like yes, I'm the commentator, but there's people that know more than me. Those are people I can use as assets and ascertain stuff from and pull information from. And if you use it the right way and get in touch with the right people want to help you. You know that as being a fan of the business.
Yep.
You want people to be successful in this business. You want people that you want to help them out any way you can. So, I think sometimes having that relationship with certain people or leaning on those assets is a good thing.
Yeah, the problem with Twitter, I often say to people, is that it's people's published gut reactions to things.
Oh yeah.
And then it's just not, and most social media is not conducive for dialogue, which is where most of it gets lost. People are a lot more alike sometimes than people realize.
Dude, absolutely. Right. I bartend when I'm not doing commentary. So I deal with people all day, and I deal with people from every spectrum of life, blue collar, white collar, divorced, married, young, old, I deal with it all, dude. All I do in life is watch the Mets. I'll watch the Knicks. I got Knicks season tickets. I'll watch the Mets. That's what I do. That's like what my life is. So I do that. I work and I do the wrestling stuff. And I'm with my girlfriend, or I go to the movies once a week. I don't have much thoughts on anything, realistically, there's nothing that affects my life. Honestly, there's nothing going on in the world that affects my life, for whatever reason. Maybe it's my age or whatever. I go to the movies. I have my dream job. I bartend. I'm happy. All I want to do is really talk about sports, whatever movie I watched, and crack a couple of jokes. That's my happy level in life. And you gotta find that sometimes, that space where you can do that, because otherwise you're gonna I get myself in trouble all the time, because it's a place where you can get in trouble.
How did you end up in wrestling announcing? I think when I first crossed paths with you, you were doing some work with House of Hardcore, managing Victorlicious.
Yep.
What made you go in the direction of wrestling announcing?
Conversation with William Regal. I got booked as an extra in 2013, October of 13, down in Orlando and Tampa, which is a story in and of itself, how I ended up down there for that. But I actually ended up going down there, doing the extra work. So they had me do the match that I was woefully unprepared for. I did with poor Sam Adonis, Corey Graves' brother. And I remember John Cena sitting at the commentary table, Regal being there and around ringside. This would be the night of the SmackDown taping, so it was the Tuesday. So Monday, you kind of sat around all day and did nothing, and then Tuesday was that. Then you go do the promos, and you did the promos in front of Regal and Brawler. And this was the old way that you got, because I don't think 2013 there was even NXT yet. I think it might have still been FCW.
Yeah, or they were having the reality show NXT.
Yeah, they were. Yes, they were going in whatever direction they were going in back in 2013. God, I'm old. I've been through Deep South, OVW, FCW, NXT 2.0. So anyway, so I did my promo, and I remember Brawler just shit all over me, and I was like, well, that sucks, And Regal looks at me and he goes to me, he goes, you thought talking was going to be your key here this weekend, right? I was like, yeah, kind of. He goes, there's something very genuine and very real when you talk. I don't know what it is. I don't know why, but when you speak, I believe you. He goes, so maybe you should focus on that and figure out where that can take you. I can't help you get there. It's not my specialty, but maybe that's what you should focus on. And I remember years later, because the years run into each other, Regal would start coming to Evolve shows, and I was the one that had to pick him up, and I was kind of his chauffeur for the weekend. And he remembered me from that loop, and I reminded him of that story. And every time I talked to Regal, at this point I was on Busted Open and doing all that stuff. So, but the first seed that was planted that's the path I should go down would have been William Regal.
Interesting. If you had to explain to someone, what the wrestling persona of Larry Dallas was, how would you do that, and how close to yourself is that?
It was me turned up to 25. I don't think it works today. Today's culture, I wouldn't do it the same way I did it back then. you gotta understand something. I was kind of trying to figure out how to get myself known, and my job was to be the hated guy on this like super indie, that was that was all work rate and wrestling, and I was just kind of out there to be like the outlier, the different thing there, and be the character, and I wanted they wanted me hated, and I wanted to be hated, and I kind of carried myself like that, at shows. Like the moment I walked through the building, the moment I saw fans, I tried to live it up and play it up. And it was a sleazy guy, it was playboy type guy, at the bar, it's gonna buy bottles, like Jersey Shore meets like Staten Island, like rich guy, and it would never work today, because you can't play those kind of characters today. Today's society and today's fan base wants more out of people. They want more genuineness out of who you are as a person. So it's weird because I look back on it and I'm like, oh man, I'm like people don't like me just from those years, because they think I'm like from those years, and like I'm really not. But that's what the character was, and that's people believed it. Maybe that made me good at what I did, at portraying something or doing something. But you can't do it today. And it's so funny how much the world can change in 5, 10, 12 years. Because I mean, when I tell you you could not do that today. Like you could not be how I was. You could not do that kind of act. You could not do a lot of those things. It would not get over. If you look at what gets over on the independents now, like organically, and I don't have to like their styles of what gets over, but like you have to study what gets over. Like the Effies get over, and the the Dark Sheiks get over, and Joey Janela gets over on the indies. I don't have to personally be a fan of like their style, what they do, right? But you got to respect the fact that they know how to get over in today's marketplace. And I think if you're a younger guy studying that, like how to get over today in the indies, you got to be like those guys and get a character over that's authentically you, a little turned up, or you got to be like the super like Wheeler Yuta's and Daniel Garcia's, super great wrestler guy to be over on this marketplace nowadays. I don't think characters like me worked today compared to, I don't think it even worked 10 years ago, to be honest with you, but it was just something that they did.
Yeah, it's interesting you said that about the Effies and the Joey Janela's and stuff like that, because even if you don't like the character or you don't like the style or something like that, you have to understand that, like, okay, if it worked and if it sold tickets, then it doesn't really matter if you liked it or not, because someone did.
Well, like I asked Sabu once, like, why the table? And Sabu was like, I would have used the fire extinguisher if it was ringside. I forget what he actually used as the example of that, but like the table was there, so he used the table. You see now there's like doors, there's all these different things that have no purpose being there.
Yeah.
Which was why like I don't like it. But if it works, it works. But like I would have never thought in a million years that when I talked to Sabu the first time I met him, that he would have this great psychological mind for wrestling. Yep. And he did, because everything he did was able to make sense to him when he explained it to you.
Yep. I've heard that before too.
I don't think there's a lot of stuff happens nowadays that you can explain to me logically why it's taking place, and that's where like I lose my interest. But again, if it gets you over, God bless you, go make your money. It works.
Yeah. So you had one of the more interesting early pandemic stories I knew of. You were in Japan when COVID-19 hit, and couldn't leave right away, and you had shows coming up, and they all slowly got canceled, and then you came back to the U.S. And tell me about that time and just kind of where things were going, because you were flying high with
flying high, man. And I was going over every month at that point, November, December, January. And then I got home beginning of mid-February, early February. And then I was going back out. I flew back out February 27th or 28th. So I was watching it get worse month by month over there. It went from temperature checks to having to fill out extra paperwork, to doing different things to get in and out of there. But America really wasn't paying attention. And I remember, I'll never forget, I'm laying on a couch, and I'm flying out like the next morning, and I just read that New Japan canceled a show or two. And I was like, this ain't good. So we go do the show the next day. It would have been the 29th of February. It was a leap year. We did the show 29th, Osaka Joe. We were doing 2 shows there. All the fans had their masks on. I go out to dinner with Kai and all the other foreigners, and dude, we had a great, great dinner. I'm like, I'm supposed to be here for 6 weeks. I'm like, all right, man, I'm bunked in. This is great. Like, I can do the next 6 weeks standing on my head. We're going to be traveling all over. We go to Tokyo on Tuesday. Rock and roll. Next day, I go to the show, pre-show meeting. It's all in Japanese. Standing there, and I can just tell the vibe of this meeting is bad.
Yeah.
I just can tell by like the tone of Shacho. Shacho's what you call the president over there. Shacho's voice. I could tell by the tone and tenor of the wrestlers there, and I'm like, this is not good. And they told me they're like, oh, Laddie-san, like, next 2 weeks canceled. And I was like, okay, like that's all right, so I'll stay at the dojo for the next 2 weeks, like, and we'll get right back on the road. I'm like, no big deal. And then what it became was every week they'd cancel another week of shows.
Right.
And, Martin Kirby from England was there. Michael Sue from Hong Kong, Ho Ho Loon from Hong Kong, and it was Diamante, who's not the Diamante that people know. It's a wrestler from Mexico, and this guy Jimmy was there. So my room in the dojo was 2 Mexicans, the British guy, and the two Hong Kong guys. So we're on bunk beds. It's comfortable. You get used to it. It's not horrible. So Michael broke his ankle like that show. So he flew home to Hong Kong like immediately. Then Martin Kirby was smart enough to go home. He's like, this ain't looking good. Things happening home. I'm going home. My dumb ass was like, well, I made a 6-week commitment. This is my job. Like, they haven't asked me if I want to go home. I'm not going to push the issue. I'm just going to stick it out. And I was like, literally, I'm 13 hours ahead of America. And I was waking up every day reading the news over here. And it was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And I ended up doing I think we did 2 empty arena shows in that time frame. And it was horrible. It was like we just did all that work. I went over there and I had no certainty of what was going on. I mean, they were very gracious. They paid me the entire tour. Every show I was supposed to work, I got paid for. They took us out to dinner once a week. There was dinner at the dojo. Like, I didn't really want for anything. It was just, watching the world go to crap. And I didn't know if I was going to come home or not. Like, I didn't know if I was going to stay or if I should go home. And I thought in my head that, like, going home, I'd be home for like a month.
Right.
And then I'd be back to work. And like, I ended up like coming home. I had to get a job. Like, I went from doing like, traveling the world to working Home Depot, $15 an hour, like sitting at the door when they had the lines for people to get in.
You got to do what you got to do.
Because you got to understand, I couldn't bartend either, right? Because the bars
that wasn't open.
So exactly. I came home, like everything I do was gone. My plan A and B were gone in like a Thanos snap. So it was a rough time mentally. Mentally, that was the worst I've ever felt in my life because it felt like there was no end in sight. It felt like no one gave it. The people fighting every day about everything. People just arguing about things and the mismanagement of this country and this government as a whole about that thing, whatever side you're on. And like, here you are as an individual, selfishly, like everything I loved was gone. Like there was nothing. Like I had nothing I wanted. There was nothing I needed. Like there was nothing I wanted to do. Everything was gone. I went from the highest of highs to like literally like rock bottom, like next day. So that was rough. But thankfully I persevered through it. But that was the roughest period of my life.
How long total were you in Japan for?
For that period? Yeah. 6 weeks.
Wow. That's I remember just following you on social media at that time and being like, I don't know what's gonna, because nobody had any idea what was gonna happen with anything at all. That I pretty much
when I flew home,
kind of still don't. But
there was like 7 people. There was like 7 people on my flight. It was not a lot of people on the flight, and I remember going through JFK, and the security guy. I mean, again, I just landed from Asia. This is April. This is like April 6th or 9th. This is like height of the pandemic, and I walked through security, and the guy's like, "Do you feel all right?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "All right, go through." And I remember Lincoln, I was like, dude, that is not good.
That is probably not the protocol that person
is
supposed to be following.
I'm like, that is not like it was so bad that like I left my bag in Japan. My bag I still have a bag of luggage there.
Wow.
Because I didn't want to wait at the airport because I didn't want to be around people. So I just took my carry-on so I can get in and out of the airport as quickly as possible because that's how paranoid at the time you were about the pandemic. And if you ever drove in New York, man, the Van Wyck. I mean, the Van Wyck can have traffic at 3:00 in the morning.
Yep.
There was no car on the road.
Wow.
And I was like, what? I was like, I thought I came home to The Walking Dead. I'm like, what did I come home to? I had to quarantine for 2 weeks, right? And then it was like, all right, well, I got to figure out what to do for work. And like, obviously, like again, like I bartended, I bounced, I worked, I worked bar jobs, and I did wrestling. I had nothing. I had nothing. No one was hiring. You know, I picked the worst time in the world to get stuck in another country, but you survived it. It's a fun story.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so we're going to move on to something we call the 3 count now. It's going to be 3 quick questions and your responses. Okay. So if you could insert Larry Dallas's voice into any moment in wrestling history, what would it be?
I would love to do Shawn Michaels Razor Ramon ladder matches. I was there live for that. So
oh, wow.
I would love to just call a classic like that. I was 9 years old. That was my first ever WrestleMania I went to.
Who is the funniest person you have personally encountered in wrestling and why?
Bobby Fish. Really? Bobby Fish is hysterical. Like, people don't realize how funny Bobby Fish is. Like, Bobby Fish, when we were on the road with Bobby Fish, I thought Bob Fish was one of the funniest guys in the world. He always made me laugh. I'm sure Vic and Hale would say the same thing because they Bob trained with DeVito, I think. So there's that Northern New York connection. Bobby Fish is really funny. Like, really, really a funny guy.
Interesting. And so who are your all-time, in your opinion, the 3 best play-by-play announcers and the 3 best color commentators in pro wrestling history?
Play-by-play, you'd have to go Jim Ross. He's probably number 1. I would put Tenay up there in the top 3. And I think, honestly, right now, Gordon Soley's like the godfather of all of it. But Kevin Kelly's called a lot of classic matches now too. So for me, God, but Tony Schiavone got good this year. Got really good coming back to AEW too. I would go, and this is a stretch. I would go Jim Ross because Jim Ross is the voice of my teenage years and everything like that. And when Jim Ross was good, there was no one better than Jim Ross. Then I would go Tenay because he introduced like the international world to me. And I think he was very important to TNA's growth and interest there. And then for number 3, right now, I think Kevin Kelly has a really good shot. Lenny Leonard's like up there, but he just hasn't had the exposure. And but I'm not going to put my friend over for no reason. I would Kevin Kelly for my generation might be up there now, top 3. And then color guys, I mean Bobby Heenan, unquestionably number 1 with a bullet. I mean, there's no one better than Bobby Heenan to me as a color guy. He is the apex of the position, the apex of that role. I think that Jesse Ventura growing up. See, I'm going to go with voices I grew up watching. Yep. Jesse was so good if you go back at it, at justifying what the heels did, right? I challenge anybody. Go watch any Hulk Hogan match from the 80s with Jesse on commentary. Like, go Hogan Savage at WrestleMania 5 because that's a pretty good match. Jesse always points out like when Hogan's cheating or like what Hogan's doing and points out the hypocrisy of it. And I think that's such a brilliant move from a color guy to point out why something's happening the way it does and to be able to justify a heel's actions, especially if you're playing that heel commentator role. So I think Bobby and Jesse like kind of innovated that role, created those roles. I think they're up. I think they're got to be top 2. God, third best color guy. Corey Graves was really good when he wanted to be. Corey Graves is good now, but the problem with WWE is that like it's hard to judge a WWE commentator because they're so produced.
Yep. That
you're blaming the talent for someone else's words in their ears and getting directed 5-6 different ways. So I feel like they get an unfair slant now because I do feel like they're so produced and so over and get so word saladed of what they have to say. So I would go like, Steve Corino is really good on color. If you go back to the Ring of Honor days, he was always entertaining.
Very good. Well, Larry, thank you so much for joining us today on Under the Ring. A lot of fun talking to you as always.
Absolutely, brother.
I'd love to do this again in the future.
Anytime you want to, man, let me know.
All right.
Thanks, brother.